The first thing I remember about that day was the silence. We were standing in the cemetery in San Francisco, the fog rolling in from the bay, and my grandmother's casket was being lowered into the ground. Everyone around me bowed their heads, some in tears, but my parents weren't grieving. They were already arguing. My father's voice cut through the quiet like a knife as he told my mother she had no right to touch my grandmother's estate. She fired back that she deserved half because she had been the only one by her mother-in-law's side in the final weeks. Their voices grew louder, sharper, until the mourners began to shift uncomfortably. Then, in the middle of it all, my father turned to me. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't care who heard. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Ethan, you get nothing. You don't deserve a single dollar of her fortune." She stepped in and added, "Your grandmother may have spoiled you, but she didn't raise a man who can carry the Rourke name with pride." The words hit me harder than the cold wind. My parents had never missed an opportunity to remind me I was a disappointment, but to hear it here, at my grandmother's funeral, in front of family and friends, was unbearable. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger buried, because I knew if I spoke, my voice would crack. I wanted to scream that I never cared about the money. All I cared about was her. Grandma Margaret had been the only one who made me feel like I belonged. She had told me once, "You see the world differently, Ethan, and that's your gift." Now she was gone, and I stood there, surrounded by family who saw me as nothing more than a waste of space. But what I didn't know was that she had left me something after all, something far more powerful than money. When the service ended, the family lawyer walked up to me quietly and said, "Ethan, there's something your grandmother wanted you to have." He handed me an old, sealed envelope with my name written across it in her familiar handwriting. I tore it open, my hands shaking. The first line I read made me stop breathing. San Francisco has always had a way of looking beautiful and cold at the same time. The morning of my grandmother's funeral was no different. The fog pressed down over the streets, swallowing the tops of the old Victorian homes and clinging to the church steeple like a heavy shroud. The bells rang slowly, their hollow sound echoing across the cemetery, and every note seemed to remind me of what I had lost. My grandmother, Margaret Rourke, had been the heart of our family, though my parents would never admit it. She was the one who pulled us together for holidays, who remembered every birthday, who slipped me notes of encouragement when I was failing to meet the impossible standards of my mother and father. Without her, the family felt like a house with no foundation, leaning and ready to collapse. I stood near the front, stiff in a black suit that did not feel like mine. I had borrowed it from a friend because my parents never thought it was worth spending money on me for things like this. My hands were shoved into my pockets, and my head was bowed, though not in prayer. I was trying to keep my eyes away from them. Clara and Victor Rourke, my parents, were dressed like royalty, even in mourning. My mother wore a tailored black dress, her pearl necklace gleaming against her pale skin. She dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, though I had not seen her shed a real tear for my grandmother. My father stood tall beside her, a silver tie around his neck, his jaw set in that expression he wore whenever he wanted the world to know he was in control. They looked like a grieving couple, but I knew better. Their grief was not for my grandmother. Their minds were on her fortune, $12 million spread across properties, investments, and a lifetime of careful savings. To them, her death was not just a loss, it was an opportunity, one they each wanted to claim. I thought back to how different things were when Grandma was alive. Margaret had a way of softening the sharp edges of my parents. She would hold my hand at dinner when my father began to criticize me for not following his footsteps into law. She would slide an extra cookie onto my plate when my mother scolded me for gaining weight. She had told me once in her gentle voice, "Ethan, don't let them measure your worth by their yardstick. You have a gift, and one day the world will see it." Those words carried me through nights when I felt like I was suffocating under my parents' disappointment. My mother never hid her disdain for me. She had wanted a son who looked and acted like her vision of a Rourke, polished, ambitious, ruthless. Instead, she got me. She often reminded me of that fact. "You waste your time with art and books," she would say. "Do you think paintings will put food on your table? Do you think your grandmother's money will carry you forever? It won't." My father was worse in his own way. His words cut deeper because he delivered them with certainty, as if they were law. "You are not strong enough to lead this family," he once told me. "You don't deserve the name Rourke. You're weak." I tried to hide my pain from them, but Grandma always saw through me. She would pat my shoulder and tell me that strength was not always about how loud you spoke or how much money you earned. She said real strength was in kindness and honesty, qualities she insisted I had even when I felt invisible. As the priest spoke about her life, I looked around at the faces of the mourners. My Uncle Jonas was there, shifting impatiently in his seat, his eyes flicking to the polished casket as if it were a treasure chest instead of a resting place. He had always been a shadow behind my father, following his lead, waiting for scraps of power or wealth. My cousins whispered among themselves, their dark suits too crisp, their eyes bright with curiosity about what the will might say. None of them were there for her. Not really. They were there for what she left behind. I stood among them and felt like a stranger in my own family. I had no claim, no voice, no presence in their world of money and power. But inside me was a storm. I loved her. I missed her. I hated that her death had become a spectacle, a stage for greed and ambition. When the priest finally lowered his voice in prayer, I closed my eyes and tried to remember her laugh. It was soft, almost musical, the kind of laugh that made you want to smile no matter how bad your day was. I pictured the afternoons we spent in her kitchen, her teaching me how to bake bread while she told stories about her childhood. She had grown up with nothing, raised by a single mother who cleaned houses to survive. Everything she built with her own 2 hands. That was the woman we were supposed to be honoring, but all I could hear was the sharp edge of my parents' whispers as they argued behind me about what they believed was rightfully theirs. By the time the casket was lowered into the earth, I felt hollow. My family was splintering in front of me, and I had no way to stop it. Yet, in the middle of that emptiness, I also felt the faintest spark of something else. My grandmother had always been deliberate, always thinking ahead. I had no idea yet what she had left behind, but I could not shake the feeling that this day, as heavy and suffocating as it was, would not be the end of her influence on me. It would be the beginning. The moment the service ended, the atmosphere shifted. What had been cloaked in silence and forced reverence cracked open into hushed conversations, quick glances, and the unmistakable buzz of family politics. People drifted toward the reception hall, but my parents stayed close to the casket. Their voices were low at first, then louder, sharp enough for the nearest mourners to hear. My father's jaw was clenched, and his hands cut the air as he argued. "You don't get to touch a penny of this estate," he snapped at my mother. "I made the decisions that kept her assets safe. I built this family's reputation while you sat back." Clara straightened her shoulders, her voice cutting back with practiced venom. "You think you carried her fortune on your back? I was the one by her side when she was sick. I handled her doctors. I gave up my time while you buried yourself in work. If anyone deserves a share, it's me." Their fight grew louder, echoing through the hall. Some relatives tried to pretend they didn't notice, but others watched openly. My Uncle Jonas leaned against a column with his arms crossed, a thin smirk on his lips as if he enjoyed watching them tear each other apart. My cousins whispered to one another, eyes darting between my parents like spectators at a boxing match. I felt the stares pressing down on me, waiting to see where I fit in this circus. My father turned suddenly, his gaze locking on me. His face was flushed, his voice harsh enough to silence the chatter. "And as for you, Ethan," he said, his words slicing through the air, "don't think for 1 second you're entitled to anything. You've done nothing to earn it. You've been nothing but a disappointment." A wave of heat shot through me, my heart pounding in my chest. My mother didn't step in to defend me. She only folded her arms, her lips curling in disdain. "He's right," she said coldly. "Your grandmother may have spoiled you with her attention, but she didn't prepare you for the reality of this family. You don't contribute. You don't lead. You are not part of what we've built." Their voices carried so clearly that I saw one of my grandmother's old friends flinch. The woman glanced at me with pity, her eyes soft, but she said nothing. No one said anything. The silence of the others made my parents' cruelty echo louder. Uncle Jonas let out a low chuckle. "Guess you'll have to finally learn what it's like to work for a living," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No more leaning on family handouts." I felt the humiliation burn in my chest. I wanted to shout, to remind them that I had never asked for money, that I had never cared about wealth the way they did. All I had wanted was their approval, their acceptance, some acknowledgement that I mattered beyond my failures in their eyes. But I bit down hard, my teeth grinding together, because if I spoke, I knew my voice would shake. I thought of my grandmother again, of her telling me to hold my head high, to find strength in who I was, not who they wanted me to be. But in that moment, those words felt far away, drowned out by the sharp edge of my parents' rejection. The argument between Clara and Victor kept spiraling. They spoke of assets, properties, investment portfolios, each claim more selfish than the last. They didn't even lower their voices anymore. It was as if my grandmother's grave was nothing more than a stage for their greed. The shame clung to me like smoke. Every time I looked up, I caught the eyes of someone watching. Some looked embarrassed for me, others entertained by the spectacle. No one spoke up to stop it. No one told them they had gone too far. I wanted to walk away, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. Every word they hurled at each other seemed to chip away at the image of family I had once held on to. All that remained was the truth. I was alone among them. My parents had made their judgment public. To them, I was not just unworthy of the inheritance. I was unworthy of carrying the family name at all. When the argument finally slowed, it was not because they reached an agreement, but because they had exhausted themselves. My father's face was red with anger. My mother's lips were pressed in a thin, victorious smile, though she had gained nothing. My uncle whispered something to one of my cousins, and they laughed quietly as they walked away. I stood there, silent, feeling every eye turn away from me. My parents had humiliated me in front of everyone. They had stripped me of dignity at the one place I should have been allowed to mourn in peace. I turned my face toward the ground, blinking hard to keep my vision clear. Inside, anger and sadness clashed like fire and ice. I wanted to scream, to leave, to disappear, but I stayed, forcing myself to stand still. I told myself I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I thought that was the end of it, that the funeral would be remembered only for their fight and my humiliation. But just when I was ready to walk away, a quiet voice behind me stopped me. "Ethan," the lawyer said softly, "your grandmother left something for you." The chaos of my parents' argument was still echoing in my head when I felt a hand rest gently on my shoulder. I turned and saw Robert Hale, my grandmother's lawyer. He was a tall man with gray hair combed neatly back, his dark suit pressed to perfection. His presence was calm, steady, and completely out of place in the storm of greed that had just swallowed my family whole. "Ethan," he said quietly, so that no one else could hear, "your grandmother asked me to speak with you today." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. My parents had just declared to the world that I was cut out of everything, that I had no place in the Rourke estate. Yet here was the lawyer, the man who knew every detail of my grandmother's will, looking at me with a seriousness that told me this was not about them. This was about me. I nodded, my throat dry, and followed him as he gestured toward a small study tucked off the side of the church hall. The door closed behind us, muting the sound of laughter and hushed whispers from the other mourners. The room was dim, lit only by the pale light coming through a narrow stained glass window. A wooden desk stood in the center, and on it lay a single envelope, worn with age, yellowed at the edges. My name was written across the front in handwriting I knew instantly. My grandmother's. My chest tightened as I stepped closer. I reached out but hesitated, my fingers hovering above it. The last time I had seen that handwriting had been on birthday cards and little notes she used to slip into my sketchbooks. Now it was here, waiting for me, like her voice reaching out one final time. Robert spoke softly behind me. She left this for you alone. She was very clear that no one else was to see it. She trusted you, Ethan. Those words hit me harder than any insult my parents had ever thrown my way. She trusted me. In a family where I was constantly told I was unworthy, my grandmother had set me apart. My heart pounded as I picked up the envelope. The paper felt fragile, as though it might crumble in my hands, but the weight of it was undeniable. For a moment, doubt clawed at me. What if it was just a letter of comfort, words meant to soften the blow of my exclusion from the estate? What if it was nothing more than a reminder to stay strong? I wanted to believe it was more, but a lifetime of being overlooked had trained me not to hope too much. Still, I slid my finger beneath the flap and tore it open. Inside was a folded letter, carefully written in her elegant script, and a small brass key attached to a ribbon. My breath caught as I laid them on the desk. I unfolded the letter, my hands trembling. The first line stopped me cold. Ethan, you are the only one who ever truly saw me, not my money. This is why I trust you with what no one else knows. I read the line again, and again, each word cutting through the noise of my parents' cruelty. My grandmother had seen me. She had known the truth about this family, about their obsession with wealth and power. And she had chosen me for something. I glanced at Robert, who gave me a small nod. Take your time, he said. I kept reading. Her words were filled with love and a kind of urgency I had never heard from her before. She wrote about how she had spent her life building not just wealth, but a legacy she did not want corrupted by greed. She wrote about the importance of truth, about the need for someone in the family to carry her values forward. And then she explained the key. The brass key, she wrote, belonged to a safety deposit box at a bank not far from her old home. Inside was something she had never spoken of to anyone else, something that was not included in the estate, something my parents and uncle knew nothing about. She made it clear that it was meant for me alone. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief that I had not been forgotten, gratitude that she had left me something meant only for me, and fear, because whatever was in that box carried weight far beyond money. The way she wrote about it, it sounded less like a gift and more like a responsibility. I set the letter down, my hand pressing against the desk to steady myself. I thought of my parents outside, laughing with relatives, already scheming about how to split the fortune. If they knew about this, they would never let me keep it. They would fight me for it, crush me under their power, the way they always had. Robert's voice broke my thoughts. She believed in you, Ethan. She said you were the only one who could handle what she left behind. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. I had a choice. I could tuck the letter back into the envelope, pretend it was nothing, and let my life continue the way it always had on the outside, invisible, powerless. Or I could take the key, hold on to her trust, and step into whatever she had prepared for me. I reached for the key. The brass was cool against my palm, heavier than I expected. As I closed my fingers around it, something shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I felt stronger than my parents' words. I felt chosen. I slipped the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into my jacket. The key I clenched tightly, unwilling to let it go. When I turned back to Robert, he was watching me carefully, as though he could see the decision I had just made. I'll honor her trust, I said quietly. Whatever she left, I'll protect it. Robert nodded once. That's what she wanted. As I stepped out of the study, the murmur of voices washed over me again. My parents were still in the reception hall, their smiles false, their eyes sharp as they worked the room. They didn't notice me at first, and for once I was glad. I kept my hand in my pocket, my fingers wrapped tightly around the key. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but they were wrong. My grandmother had given me something none of them could touch, and I was determined to find out exactly what it was. I could barely sleep that night. The envelope and the key sat on my nightstand, a silent reminder that my grandmother had chosen me for something my parents and uncle knew nothing about. My mind replayed her words again and again. She trusted me. She saw me. That thought alone was enough to keep me awake, but the weight of the key added another layer. What could she have left behind that was so important it had to be hidden away from everyone else? By the next morning, I could not wait any longer. I dressed quickly and tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket, making sure the key was secure in my hand. The streets of San Francisco were still wet from a light rain as I walked toward the bank listed in her letter. It was an old brick building on the corner of a busy street, the kind of place that looked as though it had been there for generations. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. A man in a dark vest greeted me politely. My voice shook slightly as I explained I needed access to a safety deposit box under my grandmother's name. He checked my ID, compared it to the authorization she had left on file, and then led me down a long hallway to a vault door that looked like it belonged in a museum. With a series of clicks and turns, the door opened, and we stepped inside a room lined with small metal doors. He pointed to the one marked with my grandmother's number. "You may use one of the private rooms," he said, handing me a tray where I could place the contents. I nodded and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for me. When the box slid free, my chest tightened. I carried it carefully into a side room and closed the door behind me. The box was heavier than I expected. I set it on the table, hesitated for a breath, and then lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of leather-bound journals tied with a faded ribbon, a velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope addressed again in her handwriting. "To Ethan, when you are ready." My hands shook as I untied the ribbon around the journals. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed at the edges. I opened the first one and felt like I had stepped into another world. These were my grandmother's diaries, written over decades. She had documented everything: her struggles growing up poor, her years of building the family fortune, the sacrifices she had made, and the truths she had kept hidden. As I turned to the pages, my eyes widened. She wrote about how Victor and Clara had betrayed her trust over the years, manipulating her finances, pressuring her into investments for their own gain. She wrote about Jonas secretly siphoning money, using her name for deals she never approved. She had known about their greed all along, but had kept quiet to protect the family name. And in her words was a message meant only for me. "Ethan, you must know the truth. They will destroy each other for wealth, but you must not become them. These journals are my legacy. With them comes responsibility and the choice of what to do with the truth." I sat back, stunned. All my life I had been told I was weak, unworthy, a disappointment. Yet here was proof that my grandmother had seen through everyone else's masks and trusted me to hold her story. She had not only left me wealth of a different kind, she had left me power. My hands moved to the velvet pouch. I untied the string and poured the contents onto the table. A collection of jewelry spilled out, but these were not ordinary heirlooms. Each piece was vintage, rare, and unmistakably valuable. A diamond brooch, a string of pearls, a gold pocket watch engraved with her initials. Beneath them was a folded certificate of ownership for a property in her name, a small cottage on the coast north of the city. It was separate from the main estate, something my parents did not even know existed. She had left it all for me. Finally, I picked up the sealed envelope. My name stood out in bold letters across the front. With a deep breath, I opened it. Her words were direct. "Ethan, I have left you what I could not trust in anyone else's hands. The journals contain the truths I could never speak aloud. The jewelry and the property are yours alone, gifts to remind you of my faith in you. Do not waste them. Use them to build a life that reflects who you are, not who they want you to be. Remember, wealth means nothing without integrity. Promise me you will carry forward what I valued most: honesty, kindness, and courage. Tears blurred my vision as I lowered the letter. She had not just given me things of value. She had given me her heart, her story, her belief that I could be more than the shadow my parents cast over me. I sat there for a long time, the journals stacked neatly in front of me, the jewelry glittering in the dim light. The property certificate lay beside them, a symbol of independence I had never known. For the first time in my life, I felt as though I had been seen for who I truly was. I knew that if my parents ever discovered what I now held, they would stop at nothing to take it from me. But I also knew something else. I was no longer powerless. My grandmother had given me more than an inheritance. She had given me a choice. I could stay silent and keep her secret safe, or I could use the truth in those journals to confront the family that had spent years trying to crush me. As I gathered the contents back into the box, one thing was certain. My grandmother's legacy was not just money or property. It was a call to action. She had trusted me with the truth, and I would not let her down. I left the bank with the weight of the box in my arms and a steady fire in my chest. My parents thought they had erased me from the family. They had no idea that the real legacy was in my hands. Walking out of the bank that morning, the city looked different. The same fog drifted between the buildings. The same cable cars rattled along the tracks. But something in me had shifted. For the first time in my life, I carried more than shame or disappointment. I carried proof that my grandmother had seen my worth. She had left me not only valuables and property, but also her words, her trust, and her belief that I could be different from the rest of the Rourkes. I tucked the journals into my backpack and held the envelope close to my chest as I walked through the streets. People passed by, busy with their own lives, unaware of the storm I had just come through. To them, I was just another man in a suit. But to me, I was someone new. I was no longer the forgotten son, no longer the boy dismissed by his parents as weak. I was the keeper of my grandmother's legacy. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment and opened the first journal again. Her handwriting filled the pages like a voice speaking directly into my ear. She wrote about her struggles, her triumphs, and the choices that shaped her. I read until my eyes grew heavy, and when I finally set the book down, I felt as though I had been given a map. She had lived with strength, resilience, and integrity, even when others tried to drag her down. She wanted me to do the same. The jewelry and the property certificate remained tucked safely away, their financial value undeniable. But they were not what kept me awake that night. It was her words, echoing in my mind. Wealth means nothing without integrity. Promise me you will carry forward what I valued most: honesty, kindness, and courage. In the days that followed, my parents never asked about me. They assumed I had left the funeral humiliated, another casualty in their endless fight for control. They believed they had silenced me. That belief gave me freedom. For the first time, I was not chasing their approval. I was not waiting for their recognition. I was standing on my own, guided by my grandmother's voice and the secrets she had entrusted to me. I visited the small cottage a week later. It sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, the waves crashing below, the wind carrying the salty scent of the sea. The house was simple, with white shutters and a garden that had grown wild. Inside, the walls held photographs of her life, memories carefully preserved. It felt like a sanctuary, a place untouched by the greed and anger that consumed my family. I stood in the kitchen, where sunlight spilled through the windows, and I could almost hear her laugh again. I knew then that this was more than a property. It was a gift of peace, a place where I could rebuild myself away from their shadows. I realized that my parents' cruelty had never been about me. It had been about their own emptiness, their hunger for power, their fear of losing control. I had spent years carrying the weight of their rejection, believing I was broken, But in truth, I had been free all along. They were the ones chained to greed. I was the one my grandmother chose, because I could see beyond it. When I thought about what to do with the journals, I wrestled with the choice. Part of me wanted to expose the truth, to show the world the lies and corruption that ran through my family. Another part of me wanted to protect her secrets, to honor her memory by keeping the focus on the values she lived by. In the end, I understood her message clearly. The power was not in tearing others down. The power was in building a life that reflected the love and honesty she had given me. So that is what I chose. I would not waste my time fighting my parents for money they did not deserve. I would not become them. I would honor her by carving my own path, carrying her lessons with me every step of the way. When I look back now, I see her funeral as more than an ending. It was the beginning of the life she always wanted me to live. A life where I was no longer invisible, no longer defined by rejection, but instead by the strength she saw in me all along. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it is this: family can fail you, parents can wound you, but love and belief from even one person can change everything. My grandmother gave me that gift. She gave me the reminder that our value is not measured by wealth or approval, but by the courage to be true to who we are. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you feel something, do me a favor, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment about your own experiences with family, loss, or finding strength in unexpected places. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know, and it keeps these stories alive.